Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Toolbox event. We are really excited today to have this Toolbox event for us. We have Frank Odell and his team who will be presenting today. This will be recorded and it will be shown on D106 YouTube page. So if you are not willing to be recorded, feel free to turn your camera off and that will be great. Anyway, with that being said, I'd like to invite Denise Sundquist to become the host. So Denise, the virtual lectern is yours.
Thank you, Matt. I'd like to welcome everyone to our tips and tricks SOS Bootcamp #1. Our speaker tonight, our trainer, is Frank Odell. Frank is from Staples, Minnesota, and he's been a Toastmaster since April 2019. His pathway started as innovative learning. He picked because he likes the word innovative and he didn't know anything about Toastmasters, so it was a wonderful place to start. Frank is from Wilmer, Minnesota. He started out as a farm boy. He went to Wilmer Bow Tech and graduated from the University of Minnesota with a degree in Associate Art degree from Wilmer Community College, a Bachelor of Arts degree from the University of Minnesota Morris campus, and a Master's in Education from Hamline University. Frank taught English, theater, and speech for 30 years in Milan and Staples. He's the head competitive speech coach and a program that helped more than 260 students advance to the Minnesota State Speech Tournament, and 14 of those students earned the title of State Speech Champion. Frank and his beloved wife, Bonnie, have been married for 53 years and own the Charcoal Hut, a food business at the Minnesota State Fair. So if you join us at Paul Bunyan Toastmasters, quite often we get to hear a little bit some great stories about the Charcoal Hut. Frank has been amazing on a personal note in our club as such a wonderful leader and shows grace constantly. Frank gave this speech or training, goodness, maybe a year and a half ago to our club, and it was transformational for me. I understood and always enjoyed giving presentations, but I didn't understand how to put a speech together. And I kicked myself because it just makes things so much easier. And it changed the perspective for me. Instead of writing a good speech, which is important, it really made me think about how the listener hears things. And when we construct a speech following Frank's format, it makes it easier for the listener to understand. And ultimately you connect with your guests in the audience, which is your goal. Frank has done so many great things in his community besides being on church council and the Lions Club, and also being an active member of Toastmasters. I want to welcome Frank Odell. Frank, take it away.
All right, thank you very much. Excuse me, everybody should have got a copy of the agenda. Is that correct? If you have, just thumbs up would be great. And everybody got a copy of the actual speech. Is that correct? Because this is what we're going to work on. So that's kind of just the housekeeping things. Well, there's one more thing about housekeeping that I want. Doing this evening, I get really excited about this because in my class tonight, there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 of us in this class. It's about the perfect size class for a teacher to have. Any of you have been involved in education, you understand that. It's a whole lot easier working with a smaller group than this large group, simply because my style of this is I'm going to try and get all of us involved in one way or another as we go through this. Research would tell us that people learn 3 ways. They learn by reading, they learn by seeing, and they learn by doing, or hearing and doing. And so we're going to try and incorporate as many of those as we can into this tonight. I want you to know that the more we know things, the more we realize we don't know very much. And that's kind of a basis of, I think, all education should be. As we learn that we need to know a whole lot more than where we're at. So that's what one of the fundamentals will be in this particular meeting. I'm going to start my stopwatch now because we said this was going to be a 60-minute meeting, and we're going to be done in 60 minutes or less if that's where we get to. So, and the first off thing that we're going to do is I'm going to deliver this speech. I'm going to read it to us, and I'm not going to do the red stuff that you see in your script. So if you have that script, just take it out and you can follow right along with me. Two things I hope happen when we do this. Number one, that you kind of pay more attention to what's being said because you have a copy of it word for word in front of you. And number two, if you keep a pen or a pencil in hand, you may want to make a note or a check mark or circle something that you would like to ask a question about. And it will be, that's what we're going to do as we go through parts of the speech, is I'm going to ask you, what would you like me to talk about? And then we can zoom in and look at that specific thing and talk about that. Now, understand there are no bad questions, okay? Just like there are no bad answers. If a person has a question, ask it, and we'll deal with that question. And more times than not, we're probably not going to get all the way through this in 60 minutes, and that's just fine. So let me go ahead now with this speech, and I'm just going to set my copy here on my computer, and I'm going to be looking at that and talking to you. Find treasure within. If Will Rogers didn't coin this phrase, common sense is not so common anymore, he should have, because it fits his witty, clever, and thoughtful persona. And it is most certainly true in our world today. Common sense would tell us we are responsible for what we say and do. Unfortunately, many do not realize they are the reason their life is the way it is, because they neglect to search out their options, neglect to nurture their attitude, and neglect to act. Fortunately, there are many who will find treasure within because they will discover their passion and develop their talents. In the final analysis, personal leadership is not rocket surgery, because once they accept being knowledgeable about the task at hand is critical, and being aware that a positive mindset is essential. And lastly, and most important, believing in the miracle of effort. So let's unpack the marriage vows of these three virtues. First, virtue number one. We need to be a student of the obvious and do what we can to acquire knowledge. In 1972, Don, a friend, told me it's better to own your own home than to rent a home. And I asked other homeowners, and they confirmed the value of home ownership. And they suggested I talk to Bob Eichen at Mid-Central National Bank, and I learned the only way I could afford home ownership was to use sweat equity. That means I have to do the work myself. And since the majority of the work that I've done was build a birdhouse, a doghouse, and a fish house, I would need a mentor. And with his expertise, I was able to build my home, which we live in today. So through the common sense approach of search, I was able to reach my desired goal. In addition to the search element, attitude is critical. I believe how we feel about something by itself won't work for many people. Virtue number two, because they need a knowledge base which will morph into a desire to succeed. First education, then inspiration. So if a person knows little or nothing about his choices and is highly motivated, he wouldn't know what to do or even how to do anything. But he would be excited to do something, not necessarily the desired outcome. So it seems to me Investing in oneself is a precursor to a changing attitude. You might say, I hate paying taxes, hate the place where I work, hate the people I work with. So what shapes our attitude? Our attitude is shaped by education and the influence of others. In other words, what you read or hear and who you associate with. If you are reading about people who have accomplished great things or people who have overcome major obstacles, then you will become inspired. Next, who do you connect with? As my dad said, if you hang out with skunks, pretty soon you'll smell like a skunk. If you associate with dogs, pretty soon you will have fleas also. Therefore, if you link with people who hate paying taxes, hate their job, hate their work associates, then you will feel just like them. So if this is what the last 10 years of your life have been like, the next 10 will be pretty much the same, unless you can see the promise of the future. And if you can clearly see the promise, then you will be motivated to pay the price to change. Think about the birthing process. Ask a woman about the pain of delivery, and she will most likely tell you it was worth the pain in order to hold and cuddle a newborn baby. While the labor of changing oneself might be difficult, it is certainly not like the pain of delivery. But the result would certainly be like a new life or a new beginning. Recall that virtue number 1, be a student of the obvious and do what you can to acquire knowledge. And virtue number 2, attitude is shaped by education and influence of others. And the third and most important virtue, believing in the miracle of effort. Will Rogers would probably say, nothing happens until something happens. Change begins with one step, and then another, and so on. It is as simple as that. Nothing happens until something happens, period. Finally, recall that common sense is not so common anymore because common sense would tell us that we are responsible for what we say and do. Remember that search, attitude, and effort are the marriage vows that will unlock the doors to opportunity. Be wise and use all three, and you will find treasure within. Now allow me to wrap this up with 2 quotes that I believe are spot on. Booker T. Washington said, quote, I have learned that success is to be measured not so much by the position that one has reached in life as by the obstacles which he has had to overcome, unquote. And Arthur Ashe said, quote, one important key to success is self-confidence. And an important key to self-confidence is preparation, unquote. So common sense would tell you, know your options, improve your attitude, and believe in the miracle of effort. Remember, nothing happens until something happens. I wish you safe travel on your journey. Thank you. Okay. Now, what would you like to know? Who would like to ask the first question? Turn your microphones on, everybody,
For all
please.
my
What should
okay,
be included oh, sorry, Nicole.
No, go ahead.
What should be, Frank, what should be included in an introduction?
All right, let's look at the sheet, okay? But before I answer the question on introduction, let me tell you how I go about writing a speech, okay? The first thing I do is I write the body. I just write what I want to say and what the message is and all of that, and I just write it down. Actually, I just use my computer and then write it down. And then I put spell check in it so it spells the stuff correctly that I didn't spell correctly. Gotta love that computer. And then I go back and I think, after I've done that, then I go back and I think, okay, now how do I want this to begin? In my mind, I think of this like a jigsaw puzzle. And there are three fundamental major parts, which is exactly what Toastmasters talks about in every one of their pathways. There's some basic elements that are in every speech. So I start thinking, how do I want this speech? Well, there's a million ways that you could start a speech. So how did I start my speech? I started with a quote, right? Actually, I made the quote up and attributed it to Will Rogers. I don't know if he said that or not, but I'm giving him credit for it. I think he said, he didn't, he should have. And I just thought the quote I wanted was something that made sense to the idea that I had developed in the body of the presentation. So the very first sentence that you see, if you look on your notes and see the red word introduction, the first thing I do is I assign this particular person a quote. So the question is, where do you find quotes? Oh my God, is the computer a wonderful place to find quotes? All you have to do is type in quotes and what kind of quote, and hit the button and your screen will populate an unbelievable array of quotes. So I read those quotes and then I put that in as the first thing in my introduction. And I want that quote to kind of be the seed that everything else is going to grow from. I think everybody would agree with me that in the expression common sense is not so common anymore. You can all identify with that. Is that a fair assumption? I think it is. I think it just is. You think about what's happening in the world is like, my God, you can't fix stupid. There's no possible way to fix stupid. So that's the whole concept of common sense. And that's in Frank's world. And from that, then let's look at the rest of this. That's part of the introduction. Common sense would tell us we are responsible for what we say and do. I think everybody could agree with that, right? That's just a generalization that I think everybody can agree with. And then from that, I extrapolate to the two items, and that's the contrast. If you look at unfortunately and then fortunately, see those two words? The word in red contrast are each of those. They are the exact opposites. Unfortunately, many do not realize they're the reason their life is the way it is. Then I add some justification. That's a form of logic. Because, and I put it in, this is what they failed to do. Now, in addition to that, if you look at the phrase tricolon, okay, are you with me? They neglect to search out options, neglect to nurture their attitude, and neglect to act. All right, I call that a tricolon because you can hook three sentences together with tricolons. That's what that little mark of punctuation is there with the comma and the period above it. That's a tricolon, but according to English, that is actually anaphora. Too big a word for me. I like the idea of a tricolon. So what is a tricolon? By using fundamentally the same words, I get the same feeling of a group of three. So why is it they are that way? Because they neglect to search, they neglect to nurture their attitude, they neglect to act. Does that make sense? And that fits into the theme. And then here is the purpose of the purpose is in final analysis. That's actually like a signpost that says, okay, everybody, pay attention. This is what he's going to talk about. Personal leadership is not rocket surgery. Now, I got to tell you a little bit about malapropism. That is a figurative word to describe something that people aren't expecting it's going to be. Usually people say personal leadership is not rocket science. You've heard that expression, right? Rocket science. All right. And I think most people know that. Well, this is a takeoff on that, rocket surgery. And it's like, what did you just say? Rocket surgery? So it's something you're not expecting. And it is kind of forces you to smile a little bit and think, okay, I got that. That's called a malapropism. Don't need to know the word, but that's the definition of it. And then here is the fundamental purpose of the introduction, because once they accept that being knowledgeable about a task is at hand is critical, being aware that positive mindset is essential, and believing in the miracle of effort, that's the purpose. That's also the overview of what's to come. It's like a teaser. So this line right here, so let's unpack the marriage vows of these three virtues. And that's the introduction. Questions? Turn your sound on.
I definitely caught the tricolon of neglect, 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 the three phrases.
Right.
Can you tell us a little bit about, you've got an alliteration in there, and you know, nobody loves alliterations like I do. So give us an example how you used an alliteration in your introduction.
Okay. By definition, alliteration is a repetition of the same sounds. And you can do it twice or you can do it 3 times. So in the very end of that, let's unpack the vows of these 3 virtues. These and 3 is a form of alliteration. They start together. Alliteration can also be used in the up above where I'm talking about the tricolon. They neglect to search out their option, neglect. So you see neglect, neglect, neglect 3 times, that's alliteration. So anytime you can choose words that have the same spelling and the same sound, that's called alliteration. So if you all were paying attention to your English teacher when you were 9th, 10th, 11th grade, and they talked about the figurative speech language, Tasha, just ring a bell. Tasha is a former student, okay? So that's what that is. It's just a figurative language use of the words and sound. That's what it is. Okay. Other questions? All right, so we got the one puzzle piece, the introduction. So we're all good on the introduction? All right, here's my question to you.
I was going to add one more thing that you
I can't hear you.
Oh, besides a quote, Natasha, Frank likes to ask a question. You'll notice in his speeches, and some other people might give a fact or statistic, but you want to catch the audience's attention. Or sometimes people are really good at telling a great story to get people hooked. But you'll hear Frank a lot say, how many of you have ever been to the state fair? Something like that. So you're trying to engage people.
And I would phrase that more as a rhetorical question. I would say, I wonder how many of you possibly have been to the Minnesota State Fair. I bet everybody has at one time or another in their life. So I give you the question, and that actually at times it can be part of the answer. But now let me give you a chunk of history, okay? The whole concept of question and answer was not thought up by myself or Dr. Ray Lammers, who actually came from a guy who lived 2,500 years ago, 2,400 years ago in that time frame. His name was Socrates. And Socrates had gone to the school academic of education that Plato had offered and put together of a curriculum. And the one thing that Socrates talked about a lot is ask a question and provide an answer for it. And so that's what he taught when he was an instructor in that academy school set up by Plato years ago. Now, the great irony to this story is this. If in your educational experience had any information or anybody teacher talk to you about the Greek period of history. And the Greek period of history, which was around 2,500 years ago, in that time frame, education became a very important thing, because Plato had said, there's no excuse for ignorance. People have the capability of learning knowledge, and without knowledge, that's going to crash. And so that was his philosophy. Well, Socrates was one of his students, and he came up with this whole question answer. The leadership at that period of time put him on trial for, number one, not recognizing the significance of all the gods the Greeks had. And if you know anything about the Greek culture, they had the god of love, the god of thunder, the god of water, the god of whatever it is. In fact, Walt Disney used some of those in some of his cartoons and his movies and stories and stuff. But they charged Socrates with corrupting the youth of the time. And he was found guilty, and he was forced to drink his own hemlock poison to kill himself. That was the result. Now think about that. Just think about what that meant to all those people. And we still follow the same thing. And Denise talked about, everybody should think about putting that into the body of their speech. State it as a rhetorical question, and then you all answer that question as a body part. So if you look at the script that we have, and you see in the body, first, which is a signpost, virtue number 1, I state that all out, and then I explain what that virtue is. So that is a quasi question and answer system for body points in your speech. State the question, answer the question, make it a rhetorical question. That's how it works. And that's how all body part 1 and body 2 and body 3 are all that. Okay, another question. Come on, Paul, you must have a question. Turn your microphone on. There.
I'm looking over it.
Anybody? All right, I have a question for you. Look in your script at the bottom of the second page where it says conclusion, which is the third major piece of a speech puzzle. The first piece of the first puzzle piece is called what, Natasha? Turn your microphone on.
The first piece is the introduction.
Yeah, bingo. The second piece is what, Paul?
Body.
Body. And the last piece is what we're going to talk about right now. And there are a couple specific kinds of things in that conclusion that I think everybody as a public speaker should think about using all of this. Number 1, let me ask you, David, what was the title of my speech?
Finding the treasure.
Find treasure within. What does that mean to you?
Well, you kind of have to do a little bit of, when someone gives you a speech, you kind of have to do a little bit of mining on your own to dig out the pearls and jewels that are buried in it.
Okay. And so David would say that find treasure within is an individual searching for the value that they have as a person. Is that correct, David?
Well, yeah, because you have some thought in your mind. It's not necessarily the thoughts that are in my mind. And it would be an awfully boring speech if you just were to mechanically drag us through what you have to say.
Okay. So in your opinion, then, to find the treasure within, is it your belief that those body points then help define what treasure they might find within themselves?
Yeah, I want to find out what you have to say. How does it apply to me? What can I learn from it?
Okay. So if you look in the introduction, which Natasha said was the first puzzle piece, and you look at the purpose, the reference to the title is clear in the introduction, right, Natasha? I use those words in the introduction, right?
Yes.
Yep. Okay, I use those same words in the conclusion, right? What that simply means is that when you get to the conclusion, you want to tie the speech together again and remind your audience, this is what I was talking about. Does that make sense? So when you look at the conclusion, the third puzzle piece, and it says, recall. Now that goes back to the beginning, right? Recall what I said in the beginning. Recall, common sense is not so common anymore. Now that was kind of the thesis of the entire speech, right? Make sense? And then once I've started tying that bow, I restate the three virtues, right? You see them? Remember that search, attitude, and effort. I go right back to that, which I talked about in introduction, which I explained in the body. So this is like a form of repetition. This is the takeaway that I want you to remember about this speech. And then after I have reminded you about search, attitude, and effort, I flip over and bring up that whole thing about marriage vows. Now, how on earth do marriage vows fit in to this? Well, if you go back in the introduction, what is the last thing I say in the introduction? Let's unpack the marriage vows of these three virtues. Now, when I do that, I'm making a comparison. And what kind of comparison is that? Marriage vows are like these three virtues. That would be a simile. Bingo. Understand? Now, a comparison can also be a metaphor. And a metaphor is just a comparison without using the word like. Are there any metaphors that you found that could be found in my speech? Yep. The very first metaphor that you would come across is in the end of the introduction. How is it possible to unpack the marriage vows? Can you unpack the marriage vows? Really? No, you really can't. Because you're trying to give not only the comparison, but an example of personification, although it's a very weak one. But I'm trying to make a comparison to something that we're all familiar with. So let me ask you a couple of questions. When you all got married, we all had marriage vows, correct? Do you remember what they all were? Probably not. Well, I kid Bonnie about this a lot in our marriage contract. It says on fine print on page 5 at the bottom, Bonnie's always right. Guys get that. And it makes everybody chuckle because there is some truth to it. There is some truth to it. So I'm trying to make a comparison between what you committed yourself to with this other individual, that these three virtues are important, critically important for the survival of the marriage. Make sense? Yeah. Okay. So
Frank,
there you have the, yes.
so Natasha, when you think of life is like a box of chocolates, that is a
Metaphor.
simile, right?
Or story.
Simile is the same thing as a metaphor, except it has the word like.
Or as.
Oh, okay.
Correct?
Yep.
Okay. No, I didn't mean to put you on the spot. So then
Right.
I was just Googling metaphors are life is a roller coaster. My kid's room is a disaster. The world is a
Same kind of thing.
stage. Yeah, they're the same thing, just not without like or as, but you see metaphors everywhere. And they're fun to put in speeches.
Yeah, I have to go back to English class again.
We all wish we could. I was focused on the boys in front of me.
That's a true statement for boys being focused on girls too. I get that. And I understand that. Well, one of the things that's so cool for me as a former teacher is I still get to see a lot of my students. And I really enjoy conversations with them and talk to them about where they're at and what they're doing and how things are going. And every one of them took something that they remember from their class. I remember, and then they tell me the weirdest stories about what they remember. And it's like, did I really say that? Yeah, I guess I did. Steve Barrows, who was going to be here, one of his comments he made in one of the, after he had done, we did the first boot camp class, one of his comments was, well, now I know what my English teacher was talking about. Finally, it sinks in. And that's probably true with all of us in a lot of different things. But that's a real fun part for me. Okay, so we talked about introductions, right? And we broke down the 3 fundamental parts in introduction: the attention step, the purpose statement, and then the teaser or the preview of what's to come. That's directly from Pathways. That's, if you look at the sheets that they give out, that they have in their Pathways, that's it. Now they may use some different terminology for that, but fundamentally that's it. We looked at the introduction, now that we've looked at introduction, we went through the body and we went through the points that were all set up in the introduction. In other words, the organizational pattern of the body of your speech is already there because you've used it as the preview or the teaser at the end of introduction. And then we looked at the conclusion, and in the conclusion, referred back to the title, referred back to the main theme, and referred back to the purpose of this speech. And this is what I want you to remember as a takeaway. Now, the next question is this the only way that you can organize a speech? No, it's not. But the fundamentals are always there of intro, body, and conclusion. Those three don't change. You are going to start with an intro, and you'll have a body, and you'll have a conclusion. So how could we very simply state this so that it's easy to remember? And this is the easiest thing for me to remember. Here are the 3 steps. I'm going to tell you what I'm going to talk about, then I'm going to talk about it, and then I'm going to remind you what I talked about. Okay, I'm going to tell you what I'm going to talk about, then I'm going to talk about it, and then I'm going to remind you what I talked about. You can use the same structure when you do table talks in your group. So you're given the question, repeat the question, and then make 2 comments about something that relates to the question. And then clarify comment 1, clarify comment 2, and then summarize what you talked about, restate the question, and this is what I talked about. That's the structure in all of those table topic speeches. That's what it should be, because that's what Toastmasters suggest you do in every speech. Okay, any questions about that or comments?
For some of our newer members, the really cool thing when you write this great introduction and set up your speech, the conclusion, you don't have to, it's almost a freebie because it's just a summary of the introduction because you covered it in your body and it's nice. And you'll see me, if I'm an evaluator, I always, because I'm horrible at memorizing, but I'll say, you got to have the intro, just have the intro memorized and have the conclusion, which sounds like maybe even a lot, but honestly, it shouldn't be too much because it's the same. It's just the same points.
Right.
Wrapping it up.
Yep, right. Okay, any other comments or questions?
Okay, say that. Sorry.
Go ahead.
What you said, the 3 things, I'm going to tell you what I'm going to talk about. I'm going to talk about it. And then what was the 3rd one? Sorry.
Remind them what you talked about.
What you talked about. Okay. Okay.
That's pretty simple.
It is. It's the problem of getting everything to flow, words
Right.
to flow. That's,
You're right.
yeah.
You're right. So, all right, now let me dovetail what Natasha had to say into another part of it. The words you say and how you go about doing that. In the evaluation sheet for the district speech tournament, there's a suggestion in there or a comment in there that says, don't just read your speech. And I think there are a lot of people in Toastmasters that thinks you have to deliver a memorized speech. Well, that's not what the rule says. The rule says don't read your speech. And I think what the rule is referring to, I think what the rule is referring to is if I had a chalkboard in front of me or a whiteboard or something, and I drew the scale on for music, you know, it's got about 8 lines like this, and then you put the notes in there. There are a lot of people that talk in a monotone style of delivery. Their delivery is set in the same rate and pitch all the way through like that. I tend to think of it of the type of music, what's it called? Rap music. Rap music seems to be the same note, the same cadence all the way through. In a Toastmasters speech, that would be reading your speech. If I could give you an example of this, it would sound something like this. If Will Rogers didn't coin this phrase, common sense is not so common anymore, he should have, because it fits his witty, clever, thoughtful persona, and it's most certainly true in our world today. That would be a monotone. You understand that? If I say it like this, if Will Rogers didn't coin this phrase, common sense is not so common anymore. Get the difference? I can read that, but it's my style when I'm reading it that makes, look, if President Biden can have one of those machines on the TV camera and everything is printed for him, and all he has to do is look up and he can read what's on the screen, a teleprompter, you know what those are, right? He's just reading his speech. So if the President of the United States can read his speech, so can I. Make sense? But it's how you interpret the words on the paper. That's the difference. Now that's in Frank's world. So anyway, but that's another coin in the pathways, because the pathways tells you about vocal variety. The opposite of vocal variety is monotone. Vocal variety, monotone. Which would you rather listen to? Now, I survived many professors in college that were the worst public speakers in the history of the world. And you've probably had that same experience, maybe not in college, but in high school. Put me to sleep. You know, 10 words and my mind is off someplace else because there's no real enthusiasm in what the person is doing. I liken it to a fact that if you took a radio and you set it on a pedestal in front of the classroom and turned it on and listened to somebody read a song, that's what it would be like. Boring, right? So that's a little bit about delivery. That's talked about in pathways. And you've probably heard this statement before. This is not new beans for virtually anybody. It isn't necessarily what you said, it is how you said it. Make sense?
I say that to my husband.
What's that?
I said I say that to my husband.
Yes. You need to say it differently, right, Adam?
Yes.
And I don't think guys have the corner in that market either. I think girls, not please don't anybody be defensive about this, but sometimes boys and girls act just like dogs in the standpoint that dogs understand how you say something rather than what you just said. Because you could use a gruff voice to a dog, and the dog will understand the message. And if he knows he's getting his chewed out, he'll hunker down and he'll lay down, and some of them will roll over on their back. Oh, kids do the same thing with teachers, and teachers do the same thing with kids, and husbands do that with their wives, and wives do that with their husbands. This isn't rocket surgery, right? I mean, this is something that just about everybody understands because that's what we do. You want to send a quick message to your husband about how you feel? He isn't listening to your words, he's listening to the tone of your voice. And if you look at that face, facial expressions can lead a lot to that interpretation. Yes.
Frank, can you tell us a little bit more? So we know that there's an intro, a body, the body might have 3 points, and then a conclusion. Talk about the timing, not the timing, but the pausing in between giving that speech, something that some of us struggle with.
Yeah. This is what Frank does when he writes this speech. You know, after I think I've got it all put in, and if you look on the copy of your speech up in the left-hand corner, you've got mine, it says 868 words. You see that up there in the corner?
Mm-hmm.
Now, for me, that means a 5 to 7 minute speech. If you have 1,400 words written up here, that's about a 14-minute speech. Now, the key for you, as it is for me, actually for everybody, that's one of the keys. If you're going to have a 5 to 7 minute speech, 800 to 900 words is it. Now, the really cool thing is when you type this up on your computer and use Word program, in the lower left-hand corner at the bottom of your page, it'll tell you the word count. It can't get any easier than that to look at that. So when Frank writes his speeches, and this is just what works for me, as I told you at the beginning of this, I come up with this idea, I want to talk about this thing, and so I write it down. Now, maybe I've gone online and Googled something, and I'll take some information from there and I'll put it in my own words and I'll put it in my speech. So I write the body of my speech first. The very first icebreaker speech I wrote, this was what my question was. I wrote about 3 people who really impacted my life. 3 people, and I'm talking about, for me, it was a personal friend of mine and 2 college professors that changed my life. That's pretty easy for me to talk about. So I started my speech out with an introduction, and I just said the obvious. Today, I'm going to talk to you about 3 of the people that really profoundly impacted my life. That's what I said. So I skipped, fundamentally, I put the attention step and the purpose statement and the preview all in one sentence. Is that workable? It was for me at that time. These are the 3 people. First, let me tell you how Dan got me going to college. Once I told the story. I didn't need to write that down. I just told the story. Now that I've told you about how Dan influenced me, let me move on to John Huber. And then I told how John Huber influenced me. He was my freshman college English teacher. And boy, did he get my attention. And that's another story I could tell about John. Now that I told you about Dan, my really good friend that got me to college, and John Huber, who really got me interested and straightened me out of what priorities were. Now that statement is a transition. And in this speech, there are indications where there are transitions. So Dave Dorsey was the 3rd person that really influenced me, and he was the speech dramatic teacher in college that I had my freshman year. So I tell a story about Dave and what he meant to me and what he did. Okay, now I have the intro. Now I've done the body, I had 3 points. The next part is, somebody say it, what's the next part?
Conclusion.
conclusion. And I told you about Dan, I told you about John, I told you about Dave Dorsey. These people changed Frank's life. That was my icebreaker speech. Did I need to write it down? No, I had it all right here. So that's the easiest way that you can compose, Natasha, your first speech. These are the three people that really influenced my life. They were my mom, my uncle, and my sister. So what did your mom do? What did your uncle do? And you just go through and plug those pieces in and you're good to go. Does that make sense?
Underselling how much it helps the listener when you finish your first body and make your point and then transition into the next piece.
Right.
And it's really easy on the listener to, because you're speaking, but the listener can't hear as fast as you're talking and process and understand. It just is slower. So the importance of delivering your speech, not monotone, but slower, is really about the listener, not your enthusiasm. You know exactly where it's going, but the listener has no idea where the speech is going. So the more that you can preview, really helps that listener solidify, okay, now I know we're going someplace new. We're making a turn here. It's a left-hand turn. Frank's putting his blinker on. I know I'm going someplace else.
Right.
Frank, what I wanted you to speak about when we talked about the intro, body, and conclusion is that pause for the listener and how important that can be.
Right.
And I really appreciate you talking about the 800 words or 800 to 900 words and keeping track, because even when you practice it, you finish it in 7 minutes, but then you give it live and it's 10.
Yeah.
So, but talk a little bit about the importance of pausing between your intro and then the body points and before your conclusion, what that gives the listener.
I will. But before I talk about that, let me just talk about adrenaline, because every one of us we've experienced this. When you get up in front of there are a lot of people that'd rather die than get up in front of a group of people and talk. So for all of those people in Toastmasters, they've come to that fork in the road and they've accepted some facts that I'm just going to do this because that's how I'm going to learn to do it. And they just walk right over the bridge and they survive. I will tell you what I told every kid in class that I ever had in public speaking. The first goal that you have is to get out of your chair, walk up to the front of the room, say however many words you're going to say, and turn around and go sit back down. That's your goal, your first speech. That's it. And when you went to speech contests, what I told the kids was, your goal today is to walk into school, do your speech 3 times, and walk back out. And if you get back on the bus, you get an A+. Because the body pumps adrenaline through you when you're going to do something that is challenging. I don't really want to do this, Mr. O. I know, but you can do it. No one has been injured while doing a speech. The only pain is going to be your own emotions. And that's the difference. So there are times when courage wins the day. Now, how I said that with the pauses speaks directly to what Denise asked about. Sometimes pauses are more effective than words. Does that make sense? So when you finish with I'm looking at the speech, let's unpack the marriage vows of these 3 virtues. Pause, pause, pause. First, virtue number 1. Okay, that makes sense? Now, the reason that's hard to do is you got adrenaline flooding your body, and you have an 868 word speech that you know is 7 minutes, and you finish it in 4 minutes and 30 seconds. How did that happen? On the other hand, I have a history of going 14 and 15 minutes in some of my speeches. because I was at 1,000, 1,300, or 1,400 words, and I tried not to race through it. So you have to learn your style that's going to fit into that box. So that's why in some speeches, you may only have one body point. Is that okay? Yep. You bet it's okay. Or you may have three. Is that okay? Yep. That's okay. I have listened to a lot of pastors, and Pastor Carl is someone that Denise and I know in common. Give him a Bible verse, and he can talk for 80 minutes on that one verse. And that makes sense because he wraps it all around what that one verse is. And so the same thing can happen to you. Last spring in the district speaking contest, the girl or the lady that won the contest was an immigrant to this country from, who are we having a problem with? Ukraine. She came to America when she was, I don't remember, 8 or 9 or 10 years old. And her story was the adaptation to the American style of living. She had one body point. Delivery was great. She did a nice job. And based on that, she won it at that particular level. Good for her. That's simply the truth. All right, my clock says I'm at 51:46. So let's wrap this up with some final questions, okay? If you have no questions, that's fine. But I'm going to stop talking and you can ask some final questions. And if there are none, then I'm just going to wrap a bow on this and turn it back to Denise as the Toastmaster of the evening, and we'll be done. Fair enough?
Mhm.
Okay, what would you like? Oh no, I forgot one thing. On the agenda sheet at the bottom is my name and an email address. Got that? I believe in the evaluation and comments. I want you to take 2, 5, 10 minutes and send me an email. Now, Toastmasters evaluation, follow three elements of that. Number 1, tell me something that you really enjoyed, made sense to you. Number 2, give me some other comments where you think I can improve. And number 3, challenge me to do something other than that. That's the structure put out by Toastmasters. So I would ask you to do that, please. And then I'll send you your grade of A+.
I
All
don't,
right, final comments.
I don't have that sheet, so I would need your email. Sorry.
Okay, I'll get it for you. Anything else?
I'll go ahead and email that sheet to you so that you have everything.
Okay, Nicole will do that to you, Natasha. That was on this sheet.
Did you email us that earlier this week, maybe, or
I
did
did.
somebody?
I did.
I'm sorry, then I probably have it and I didn't print it off, so never mind.
Okay, then you have it.
Oh, well, Tasha,
Okay.
did you register for this? Oh,
Yes.
okay.
Yeah, I have it, I think. I just,
Okay,
sometimes I don't like completely read, I look at them and then I'll say I'm gonna go back and reread it.
I understand.
I guess I have one question regarding signposts.
Yes.
So when are they necessary and when are they not, I guess? When are they the most necessary, I guess, is the number one question.
The reason you have signposts in your speech is to let people know that you're moving on to the next point. Okay, so that's where the value is in having a signpost, because in a person's mind, to separate things out, those signposts indicate, oh, they're moving on to their next point. That's the reason for a signpost.
So you'll have, so in your introduction, you have a signpost at the end of your introduction, and then you have another one at the beginning of your body. So
Sure.
that sort of the
Yep.
repetition, letting them know that we're
Yes.
moving out of the introduction
Right.
and here comes the body. Okay.
Correct.
Makes sense.
Yep.
Thank you.
Anything else?
Good.
Well, I personally want to thank all of you for signing up and spending an hour with us doing this. I really appreciate this. I want everybody to remember that this was sponsored by the Paul Bunyan's Toastmasters Club 922 in Brainerd, Minnesota. They sponsored this. Okay, and I'll turn it back to you,
So
Madam
Frank,
Toastmaster.
it's so amazing to sit and listen to you and make it so comfortable and so comforting when you're challenged to do something, even as an adult, that maybe you think you should be better at. So I really applaud everyone that attended tonight. Really, thank you, Matt, for helping organize this, and Nicole and Frank. I always learn so much, but it's even more fun to go to one of Frank's classes and then listen to his speeches and then just try to find all the metaphors or a simile or a repetition or his signposts and know what he's doing. And it makes it being an evaluator even easier. Matt, do you have any last minute comments, or can we, it's 8:01?
Yeah, so thank you, Frank, for taking
I have
up-
one more comment.
sorry.
I paid Denise $20 to make all those statements.
Excellent. Money well spent. Well, thank you, Frank, for doing a Toolbox Tuesday or Toolbox event for D106. Anyone who has a Toolbox information that they want to share, like Frank did today, by all means, send me an email. We have room for you. We'll make it happen. Thank you, everyone. Have a good night.
All right, good
Good
night.
night.